Good morning, students. I hope and believe the last two chapters you might have done the assignment and you don't face any problems. If you face any problems, you can contact me. I'll give the answers. Today we are going to start the third chapter, Kinship, Caste and Class, Early Societies from 6th century BC to 6th century AD. I'd like to divide this chapter into 3 or 4 sections. So today we are going to start the first section of the chapter. And as you know, in the previous chapter we divided and discussed the changes in economic and political life from 6th century BC to 6th century AD. And these changes influenced the societies. How the political and economic changes affected the society. There are 3 points in it. The first one, the extension of agriculture into forested areas transformed the life of the forest dwellers. In the previous chapter we were talking about land grant. Land was donated to the people so that they could cultivate those areas. So the first point, the extension of agriculture into the forested areas transformed the lifestyle of the forest people. Second, there were emergence of craft specialists as a social group. Third, emergence of social differences due to unequal distribution of wealth. So 3 points, I'll repeat once again. Transformation of the life of the forested people, emergence of craft specialist, emergence of social difference due to unequal distribution of wealth. And we gain normally the knowledge of the social change from textbooks. And some of the textbooks are explaining the norms of the social behavior, whereas other textbooks are explaining various social situations and practices. Historians normally use textual traditions to understand these processes. Along with the text, they also used inscriptions. When they study these texts and inscriptions, we should keep a few points in our mind. First of all, we need to understand who composed it, by whom it is composed, for what purpose it is composed. So, few things you keep in mind when we study the text and the inscriptions: who composed it, by whom it is composed, for what purpose it is composed. Moreover, we also consider the language used in the inscription of the text and the way in which the texts were circulated. When we put all these things into together, we can create social histories. Now, one such famous book is Mahabharata. We normally pronounce as Mahabharata. It consisted of 1 lakh verses with a wide range of social categories and situations. It composed over a period of about 1,000 years. And the central story, as you know, is about 2 sets of warring cousins, Pandavas and Kauravas. And everybody knows these stories of Mahabharata. Who composed this epic? And it is believed that Mahabharata composed by Vyas. But when we think about it, it is not possible that one person might have composed the entire 1 lakh verses. So I'd like to give some conclusions about it. Originally, this book consisted of 10,000 verses. Later, it added to 1 lakh verses. And original story was probably composed by Sutas, who accompanied Kshatriya warriors in the battlefield, and they wanted to record it, they wrote it. From 5th century BC, Brahmins began writing. They also recorded their stories. And by this time, about 5th century BC, Kurus and Pandavas became kingdoms. Perhaps they wanted to write their stories and recorded it, and they also added to it. And last chapter we might have studied, Kuru was one of the important Mahajanapada. From 200 BC to 200 AD, the worship of Vishnu also started. That story also mentioned in Mahabharata. Between 200 AD and 400 AD, many books were added like Manusmriti. Thus, this massive book was neither written by one author nor was it written during one period. Now, let us talk about the critical edition of the book Mahabharata. From 1919 onwards, a team under the leadership of Sanskrit scholar V.S. Sugatankar started a task of preparation of critical analysis of the book Mahabharata. There were several common elements in Sanskrit version of the story. This was proved from various manuscripts which were found all over India from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, and there were a number of regional variations of the book also. Scholars started studying from works in Pali, in Prakrit and Tamil. Thus, various regional variations were also added in Mahabharata. Now let's talk about certain important points in this chapter. First, we are going to discuss about kinship and the marriage. The first one is a family structure. If we analyze the family structure, we find out that all families were not identical. The number of members in the family vary from family to family. The relationship with one another also vary from family to family. Some family members share food and other resources with others, whereas some family members do not share their resources with others. Some family members perform rituals and traditions, whereas others do not perform these things. And this type of cooperation and coordinations among one family members called familial ties. These familial ties were natural, based on blood. This was not in all families, it varied from families to families. I repeat once again, what are the main features of the family structure in 600 BC to 600 AD? All the families were not identical. The number of members in the family vary from one family to another. The relationship among the members were also vary from one to another. Some family members share food and other resources with others. Some family members perform rituals and traditions. And there were cooperation and coordination among some family members. It may not be available in all family members. If we find this cooperation and coordination, we call it is familial tie. And these familial ties were natural and based on blood. But these kind of bond ties we may not find in all the families. Historians can collect information about families belonging to rich and influential and royal families, and it is very difficult to collect or reconstruct the family relationships of the ordinary people. And historians try to analyze attitude of the people towards a family and its members. And what are the general features of the family? So let us discuss some general features of the family in the period from 600 BC to 600 AD. The first is ideal of patrilineal. What is the term meaning patrilineal? The practice of tracing descent through father's line. Patriarchal society where the male member is considered supreme. Father is considered supreme. The story of Mahabharata is also talking about it. It describes the struggle over land and power between two groups of cousins, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. Both Kauravas and Pandavas belonged to a single ruling family called Kurus, one of the major Mahajanapada. The conflict ended with a battle in which Pandavas defeated Kauravas. And after the battle, Pandavas officially proclaimed patrilineal structure of the family or patrilineal succession. And the story of Mahabharata reinforced the patrilineal structure of the family. Under patrilineal succession, sons could claim the resources including the throne of the father. Most of the ruling dynasties or ruling families followed this patrilineal system. There were exceptions also. There are some cases, if there was no son, sometimes brothers succeeded to the throne, even at sometimes a family member succeeded. These are exceptional cases. And at a very exceptional case, women also succeeded very rarely. For example, in the previous chapter we studied about Prabhavati Gupta. Second important feature is rules of the marriage. In the early kingdom, that is from 6th century BC to 6th century AD, sons and daughters were viewed differently. Daughters had no claim to the resources of the household. Daughters were married into the families outside the relatives. It is called exogamy. Exogamy is a term, the custom of marrying outside the community or the clan or the tribe. High-class families carefully selected the right person at the right time for their daughters. Thus, Kanyadan or gift of a daughter in the marriage is an important religious duty of the father. With the emergence of new towns and cities, social life became more complex and complicated. And the Brahmins prepared some rules and regulations for the society, normally called the Code of Social Behavior. And the people of society was expected to follow these rules and regulations. Such rules were prepared by about 500 BC called Dharma Sutras and Dharma Shastras. In another, we find another book also was prepared between 200 BC and 200 AD called Manusmriti. I'll repeat a few points here. The rules of the marriage. Sons and daughters were viewed differently. Daughters have no claim to the resources of the household. Daughters are married to the families outside the relatives. So we call it is exogamy, custom of marrying women outside the community, tribe or clan. So the high class family carefully selected right person at right time. The concept of Kanyadan, the gift of a daughter, became prevalent, and the Brahmins prepared certain rules and regulations for the social function, code of social behavior, and all were expected to follow these rules and regulations. Such rules and regulations were prepared and published in Dharma Sutras and Dharma Shastras, later in Manusmriti. And Brahmins claimed these code of social behavior had a universal validity. So they prescribed to be obeyed by all the people. Dharma Sutras and Dharma Shastras recognized 8 forms of marriage. Out of these 8 forms of marriage, the first 4 forms of marriage were considered good, and the remaining 4 were considered as not good. Historians are saying that the last 4 marriages were considered not good because those people do not follow the code of social behavior of the Brahmins, so they termed it as not a good marriage. In my assignment, I will provide the names of these 8 forms of marriage, which is not available in the textbook. The next feature is the Gotra of women. From 1000 BC onwards, Brahmins started classifying people in terms of Gotra. Gotra is a system which associates a person with his most ancient root. Each Gotra was named after Vedic saint. So 2 rules must be followed in Gotras. Number 1, women were expected to give up their father's Gotra after the marriage and adopt their husband's Gotra. The members of the same Gotra cannot marry. So these are the 2 rules were prepared by Brahmins at that time. Number 1, women were expressed and expected to give up their father's Gotra and adopt their husband's Gotra after the marriage, and members of the same Gotra were not permitted to marry. Whether people followed this rule or not, it is not very clear. If we examine the texts and the inscriptions, we find some of the Shatavahana rulers followed the system of polygamy. Polygamy means having more than one wife. And if we clearly analyze, we find that the names of some of the women who married Shatavahana ruler, we find that they never changed their Gotra name after the marriage. They retained their father's Gotra. Secondly, some of these women belonged to the same Gotra. Thus, some of the people violated Brahminical rules and exogamy. It proves another point that endogamy practice of the marriage within the Gotra existed. So another point you must note here, endogamy. Endogamy means practice of marrying within the Gotra. Exogamy, marrying outside the clan or the tribe or community. Endogamy, marrying within the community, within the Gotra, within the tribe or within the society. Such marriages ensured a close-knit community. So the Brahmins' rules were not followed all over India at that time. Some of them followed, some of them not followed. Finally, what was the role of mother? If women were not considered great, what was the role of mother? If we examine the Shatavahana kingdom, they followed a particular system that their names derived from their mother. It suggests that mothers were important in the family, at least in the Shatavahana kingdom. But if you analyze the Shatavahana kingdom, we find that the succession to the throne was patrilineal. Only name was derived from the mother. So in some part of India, they followed some kind of rule, and some part they followed another rule. We don't have any uniformity in rule all over India from 6th century BC to 6th century AD. Here we wind up the first section of the chapter 3rd.